Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James and welcome back to the Unity Endless Runner tutorial series. So, in today's episode we're going to take a look at speeding up the player so we're adding a little bit more difficulty to the game, a little bit more challenge. As the player goes along, things get a little bit harder because you're going faster. And we're also going to look at a better way to make sure the player stays on the ground, because if we just play the game here, for example, and we're running along and we hit the side of a platform, if we can catch one at the side like this one, we're able to just keep jumping up. If we fall down here, if I can actually catch one properly, there we go. Or if we get stuck underneath, we're able to just like keep jumping upwards from underneath the platform. That's not what we want going on here at all. So we can just keep doing that. That obviously looks weird and it wouldn't work very well for our game at all. So we're going to fix that up. But first, we're going to look at making the player move faster. And to do that, basically, the way we're going to use it is we're going to use set intervals for speeding the player up. So say the player runs like 100 meters, whatever that would be in the game, say. Then he speeds up a tiny little bit. Then another 100 meters, he speeds up another tiny little bit again. Another 100 meters, he speeds up another tiny little bit again. And as he goes on, he gets faster and faster. You could do it where continually the player is just getting faster and faster by a tiny little amount. But then you're having to multiply the speed of the player the whole time, and things can get a little bit out of control the further you go on through the game. So instead, we'll just create this kind of simple little speeding up system. So the way we're going to do that is in our player controller script over here. So we're going to open that up in MonoDevelop right here, and we're going to add a few new variables. So at the start here, we're going to say, so we have our move speed and we want to be able to multiply that speed by a certain amount. So we're going to create a new public float. We'll call it speed multiplier. And then we're going to need the amount of distance that the player covers before he starts speeding up. And we'll call this, we'll make this a new public float, and we'll call it the speed increase, not a slash, speed increase milestone. So when you hit a certain milestone, you start speeding up a bit faster. Yeah, that's all we need to do. No, we need, so yes, we have the certain distance the player has to cover, but obviously when it hits that distance the first time, you want to add on the same amount again so that the player hits the same milestone. So if we added this to itself, for example, say the first milestone was 500, then we added on to itself, it would make it 1,000, that'd be fine. But we would want the next milestone again to be 1,500, whereas if we just added on at that point to itself again, it would become 2,000, and then 4,000, and then 8,000, and suddenly you're getting the player having to run slower for much, much longer, out of control. So what we're going to do is create another value that is going to be what we actually use first. So we're going to say a private float so that we can't change that in the editor. And we're going to call this speed milestone count. So this is what we're going to be counting, and this is what we're going to be using to keep the track. And basically every time we reach the distance, the set distance, what we're going to do is add on our speed increase milestone. So say it's 500, we'll add 500, we get 1,000. Then when it's 1,000, we add 500, we get 1,500, and so on and so on. So very straightforward and simple little way to increase the speed of our character. And basically what we want to do is, so at this point here in our script, we have our move speed being set on the player. So before that, we want to set what the move speed is. And basically what we want to do is, if the player is further than where the milestone count currently is. So if the transform dot position dot x, so the x position of our player is greater than the speed milestone count. So basically if we hit the 500 marker, we hit the 1,000, 1,500, etc., then we'll get to this point. So the first thing we want to do is, okay, if we hit that point where the player needs to speed up, the first thing we want to do is move it forward so that next time it won't try and do the same thing again. So we'll say speed milestone count plus equals speed increase milestone. So now when it hits that point, it'll go, okay, add on the 500. I keep saying 500. That's not a value that would be fun to use in the game, but that's the example we're using. Okay, so now that we've hit that point, now we know, okay, so we need the player to speed up. So what controls our speed? That is our move speed variable. And basically we just say move speed is equal to move speed multiplied by speed multiplier. So we use our little asterisk symbol for multiply, and now we have a certain amount of value that we're able to increase the speed by. Say that every time we hit a milestone, we want to increase the speed by 1.5. So we hit our milestone, we go 1.5 times faster, and then we're running along a little bit faster. So we'll just see that in action now. As you can see, all we've done is added a couple of new variables and just added this one little if statement here. And then back in the game, it'll show fairly simply how we can increase our speed. So set some values a little bit high because we want to show how this will work in action now. So our move speed is fine. Our speed multiplier, we'll set that to 1.5, and that's actually a very big increase. It'll be quite jarring. You'll see the player suddenly shoot forward in speed, but it's good for our purposes here. So I'm just going to let him fall down on the ground so we can just judge by the platform's movement. So as we see, we go along here. Oh, we can just hit that little bit of speed faster, and then faster, and faster and faster and faster. And as you can see, he's suddenly speeding up so fast that he's going so fast the platforms can't even handle it. Which is obviously, you don't want that happening straight away in your game. So we'll set this speed multiplier much slower. So we'll set it to 1.05. So then it's only being multiplied very rarely. And we'll set these milestones a little bit further out as well. So 100. And we'll hit play. And if you just keep your eye on the move speed, you'll see the point where it switches up in values. So we're running along here. Well, actually, our move speed straight away went up, so we actually need to add one line to our start sequence. Oop. Jump along. As you can see, so we're not going too fast just yet, but we're starting to pick up speed a little bit. So there we go, just picked up another little bit of speed. So it's slowly making it harder, but not at a crazy amount. That's actually, I feel 100 is a little bit too far, so we'll go back to 50, that's fine. But the only problem with this is that as we go along, you're going to start reaching those milestones quicker. So if you're moving at, say, so we'll as we saw with when we set the speed multiplier really high, we'll just set it like this again. You start getting your speed multiplier going up really quickly, because what happens is, so say it takes you 5 seconds to hit the 100 the first time. If you're multiplying your speed by 1.25, the next time it'll only take 4 seconds to reach that milestone, and the next time it'll only take like 3 and a bit seconds to reach that milestone. You're going faster and faster and hitting your milestones faster every time. And so then you end up in a situation where you're hitting your milestones so fast that the player is just speeding up ridiculous speed. So what we need to do is set our milestones to go further and further away as we go along. And we can use the exact same multiplier that we used here. So we'll set that here now. So we have our move speed and we have our speed increase milestone. And basically what we want to say is, okay, every time we're adding on our milestone, we want that new milestone that's being added on to be slightly larger. So much like we did with move speed here, we'll just do the exact same thing. We'll say speed increase milestone plus equals speed increase milestone multiplied by speed multiplier. So now, so say we have 100 here. If we had there 1.25, when we hit the first milestone, it'll go, okay, now we're at 125 is our milestone, and then so on, it'll go 137.5 or whatever. So now our milestones will stay relatively regularly. It'll stay relatively the same amount of time before you start picking up extra bits of speed. So that's perfect. And like I said, we want to add in something so that our milestone is not at the 0 point every time. So here we'll say that our speed milestone count is equal to the very first speed increase milestone. So we'll just say there, like that. So now if we save that and go back in here, so now the first time it reaches 100 is when it'll first start to speed up. So if we press play here, once it's compiled, what we should see is take a little bit to get to our first milestone. We haven't got our speed up just yet. Should start to see it soon. There we go. So now our milestone has increased. We're jumping along. So as you can see, we're starting to speed up and our milestone's getting a little bit further away every time, which is perfect. That's just exactly what we want to happen. Actually, it was speeding up a little bit too much, wasn't it? And that's because I put a plus in here. We don't want that plus, we just want an equals. We don't want to be adding on the milestone multiplied by that. So that was a little bit of an error there. But we're getting a bit more sensible, because I thought that jumped up to 200 very quickly there. I wasn't really sure what was, but I thought I was going a little bit crazy. No, now we should see if we run it again, it should go to 125 when we hit that first milestone. If we get there eventually, there we go. Yes, now it's 125. That was what we were supposed to have happen last time, but unfortunately I was doing silly things. So that's how we can add a little bit more challenge to the game, but the problem is the game is still being way too unforgiving with the way we have our jumping working, which is causing our player to be able to jump on the bottom of things, like he's able to jump like crazy like that. So that's not what we don't want happening. And the way that currently works in the game, if we go back to our scene view here, we have our box all around our player, and basically we're checking to see if this box touches another box, such as this one, which is our platform, see our green box around that. So if he touches that box and determines that that's the ground, then he's able to say that he's touching the ground, which is fine for if we're pointing downwards onto the ground. But if he's touching the side of the wall, it also becomes true then, or if he's touching from beneath, it also becomes true. So what we want to do is use a slightly different system to determine when the player is on the ground. And one of the best ways to do it is, on our player here, what we're going to do is basically just add a new object to the bottom of him, and that object is basically going to, within the game, you won't be able to visually see it, but within the logic of the game, it's going to draw a little circle around itself, and it's going to say, okay, is anything within this circle the ground? And it'll be a very, very tiny little small circle, and it'll only really be able to pick up the ground when it's touching the ground. So therefore it won't be able to check when it's at the side, it won't be able to see if it's on the ground or anything over here, because it'll only be a tiny little circle around here. So we're just going to, on this player, we're going to right click on him and create empty, and we're going to call this object ground check. And because we moved the pivot point of the sprite sheet to be at the bottom of the player back in one of the early videos, automatically the ground check will be, as it's set to 0, 0, it'll move to the, if we click on this, we can see it's moved to the very bottom of the player. So that's exactly where we want it, so there's no need to move it. But if for some reason you set your pivot point up to be somewhere else, you want to make sure that this ground check is directly at the feet of your player. Okay, so now what we're going to do is go back into our player controller script. I don't know why I tried to open it again, because we already have it open. And at the moment, if we go to grounded, this is the section here that is determining whether the player is grounded. It's touching layers and it's getting my collider and checking what is the ground. So we're not going to use that anymore, but we are going to use parts of that. So if we go back up here, we've got our bool for grounded, which determines whether we're on the ground. which we obviously want to keep using, and we've got this layer mask that's determining what is ground, and we're going to still use that for determining what's in that tiny little circle we're going to draw. So apart from those two things, we're also going to need that point we just created. We're going to need to get that point, so we're going to say public transform ground check. So that's the ground check that we've just created, and we'll hook that up in the Unity editor in a minute. And we're going to need a value for how big that the radius of that little circle is. So we're going to say public float, we'll call it ground check radius. So with those two new things, we're going to be able to get our grounded. And the way we're going to check it is, what we're going to say is grounded is equal to, much like we did up here, where we said grounded is equal to whether those things are touching. What we're going to say here is grounded is equal to physics 2D dot is overlap circle. So basically we're saying if this physics circle is overlapping with what's within these brackets here that we're about to put in, then it's grounded is equal to true. So within here we're going to say we need a point for our circle to emanate from. So that's our ground check dot position, because that's the transform object that we're going to, so that is at the feet of the player. As we can see here, we need a radius, and that's our ground check radius that we just created. And if we add a little comma here and a space, we need our layer mask, and our layer mask is what is ground. So we close that and put a little semicolon at the end. And now we have a new way of determining when the player is on the ground. So we're going to save this, pop back in here, and before we do anything else, we need to hook those things up so that all our new way of handling the ground is all working nicely for us. So if we go to our player and we scroll down to our player controller script, so we've got a couple of new things here. So we want to drag this ground check into there, just like that. And our radius, we're going to set this. You can play around with the values yourself, but I find that about 0.1 works pretty well. We can see we've got this. So this is when you got a little orange triangle like this, that means there's it's not an error with the scripts, but it's a kind of a warning that you're doing something that you don't really need to be doing. So here we're saying that my collider is assigned, but its value is never used. So we'll go and fix that up in a second. It's very simple. We're not using the mic collider anymore, so we're basically just going to get rid of it. So if we hit play here now, what we should see is we're still able to determine when we're on the ground, but now if we hit into the side of an object, we can't keep jumping, or we can't keep jumping if we're on the bottom. I just happen to be stuck to the ground there, so, but if we can reach one kind of a mid-height, one would spawn first, yeah. So we get close to an object and suddenly we're not able to just jump using that anymore. So it's a bit more sensible, it's a bit more challenging for the player, and a bit more interesting. But of course, we're able to run along this bottom little platform that we created in a previous episode, just to keep it safe and make it a bit easier for us for testing. But we need to start creating some absolute challenge for the player. So we're going to have to look at how to kill the player and how to reset our game. And we're going to take a look at that in the next couple of episodes. But before we wrap up this episode, we're just going to quickly get rid of the mic collider thing that we're no longer using. So here, rather than just completely deleting it, because we might have another use for this in the future, we're just going to comment it out by putting our 2 slashes there like that. And now what happens is anywhere else that was being used, it gets marked as red. So here we can see it's marked as red, so we'll comment that out. And just to make sure, I don't think we have it anywhere else, but just to make sure, we scroll down and have a look. Nope, we're all good. It's completely gone. So we'll save that, pop back in here, and that should get rid of the little triangle thing that we had down the bottom. And once it's compiled, there we go. Now we've gotten rid of any of those little lingering errors that could have created kind of a memory problem, but not really anything too bad. But there we go. That's how we can now have the player being able to speed up as he runs along. And you should play around with those values and find something that works for you best and what kind of feels good for the challenge of your game. I like to set the speed multiplier quite low and then the milestones a little bit shorter, because then you kind of get a bit more of a gradual speed up as you go along. The higher you set your speed multiplier, the bigger the jumps feel when the player picks up speed, and it can be a little bit too obvious sometimes to the people playing the game. But there you go. Thanks for watching this episode. I will return very soon with some more Endless Runner goodness. And like I said, we're going to start looking at adding deaths and restarts into the game, and we're also going to start adding some high scores and just normal scores into the game too. So yes, thanks for watching everybody, and I'll be back soon with more Endless Runner goodness. Thanks for checking out this episode, and if you want even more Games Plus James goodness, make sure you hit those subscribe and like buttons. You can also find me on Twitter and Facebook by following the links on screen, where you can find out all the latest news about the channel. And if you want to help support the show, check out the Patreon page, where you can get exclusive content in return for helping make the channel even better. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.